The Cordillera was raised in a remote section of the Peruvian Andes, far from major cities and well outside the usual routes of travel. The range stretches across high valleys and glacial basins in central Peru, where altitudes shapes every feature of the landscape. Above 6,000 meters, the earth thins sharply, and weather conditions shift quickly. The terrain is dominated by steep ravines, hanging glaciers, and exposed rock faces. One of the most prominent peaks in this range is Ciula Grande. The mountain rises to approximately 6,344 meters above sea level. Its profile is sharp and symmetrical when viewed from a distance, with long ridges extending from a central summit pyramid. The western face, however, presents a different character. It drops steeply toward a field of broken glaciers and ice falls, forming a wall of snow and rock that alone resisted successful ascent. The surrounding valleys remain sparsely inhabited. Seasonal shepherds sometimes move livestock through the lower elevations, but above the glaciers there are a few signs of human presence. Wind moves constantly along the ridges, carrying fine snow across the ice surfaces. At this altitude, temperatures remain low even under direct sunlight. Mountaineers who travel into the Guayguas typically do so with careful planning. Supplies must be carried over long distances. Communication with the outside world is limited. Rescue infrastructure, common in more developed climbing regions, does not exist here. In 1985, this isolated mountain became the setting for one of the most documented survival ordeals in mountaineering history. Two climbers from Britain accompanied to attempt a difficult route on the west face. Their climb would succeed. The descent would not proceed as expected. In the early 1980s, a small number of British climbers were increasingly drawn to remote ranges outside Europe. Expeditions to the Greater Himalaya had long been established, but other regions of high mountains remained comparatively quiet. Among these was the Cordillera Guayguas in Peru, a compact but technically demanding chain of peaks. Two climbers who developed an interest in this range were Joe Simpson and Simon Yates. Both were part of the British alpine climbing community, which emphasized lightweight expeditions and small teams rather than large, heavily supported ventures. Joe Simpson had begun climbing in his teenage years in northern England. By his early 20s he had already built experience on difficult alpine routes in Europe. His climbing approach favored speed and minimal equipment, a style that required careful judgment and a high level of physical endurance. Simon Yates, slightly younger, shared a similar background in British rock climbing. Like Simpson, he had developed his skills in environments where climbers relied heavily on partnership and trust. The rope between two climbers on a mountain often represented the only connection to safety. In 1985 the two men planned an expedition to Peru. Their objective was the west face of Ciula Grande, a route that had not yet been successfully climbed. Previous attempts by other climbers had turned back because of unstable snow conditions and the technical difficulty of the terrain. The expedition itself was relatively small. Along with Simpson and Yates, a third British climber, Richard Hawking, accompanied them to the region. Hawkins' role was primarily logistical, managing base camp operations while the other two attempted the ascent. Reaching the mountain required days of travel through high valleys and across glacial terrain. Equipment, food, and fuel had to be carried over long distances by mule and on foot. Once established near the base of the mountain, the climbers began studying the west face. The route they planned would require several days of climbing through steep snow slopes and sections of exposed rock. Unlike guided expeditions, the climb would be carried out in traditional alpine style. This meant the team would move continuously up the mountain, carrying their equipment with them rather than establishing multiple fixed camps. The approach reflected a philosophy common among British climbers at the time. Speed and efficiency were considered essential in high mountains, where storms and falling ice could change conditions quickly. In June 1985, Simpson and Yates began their attempt. Over the next several days they moved steadily upward along the western face of Ciula Grande. The route required careful navigation through mixed terrain of snow, ice, and rock. Progress was slow but consistent. Eventually, they reached the summit. The climb itself had succeeded. But in high altitude mountaineering, reaching the top is often only the midpoint of the journey. The descent would prove far more difficult. In June 1985, after several days of climbing, Joe Simpson and Simon Yates stood on the summit of Ciula Grande. The ascent of the mountain's west face had been completed successfully. For both climbers, the moment marked the conclusion of a demanding objective that had required careful route finding and sustained effort at high altitude. However, in alpine climbing, reaching the summit rarely signals the enough risk. Many accidents occur during descent, when fatigue is greater and conditions may have changed. The two climbers began their descent along the mountain's north ridge, which they believed would provide a safer route downward than the face they had climbed. The terrain consisted of steep snow slopes and sections of exposed ice, requiring controlled movement and constant attention. During this descent, Simpson slipped. The fall resulted in a severe fracture of his right leg, near the knee. At that altitude, with no possibility of external rescue, the injury immediately transformed the situation. Moving independently down the mountain was no longer possible for Simpson. The only remaining option was for Yates to assist him. Using the rope that connected them, Yates began lowering Simpson down sections of the slope. The process was slow and physically demanding. Each lowering required Yates to anchor himself securely in the snow and gradually feed the rope through his belay device while Simpson descended below. Visibility was limited, and communication between the two men was difficult. Snow and wind frequently obscured the terrain. During one of the slowers, Simpson was being lowered down a steep slope when it suddenly disappeared from view. Beneath the snow surface was a hidden overhang formed by wind-packed cornice. Simpson broke through it and fell into a crevasse. The rope went tight. Simpson was now hanging somewhere in the darkness below, suspended on the rope, unable to climb because of his broken leg. Above him, Yates could not see where his partner had fallen. The two climbers were now separated by the edge of the crevasse and a length of rope in between. The situation had become uncertain and extremely dangerous. When Joe Simpson fell through the cornice during the descent of Ciula Grande, he did not immediately reach the bottom of the crevasse. The rope connecting him to Simon Yates above remained under tension, holding him suspended in the darkness below the surface. The interior of a glacial crevasse is an unstable environment. Snow bridges form above depth fractures in the ice, often hiding openings that descend many meters below the surface. Light rarely penetrates far inside. Temperatures remain consistently low, and the walls are smooth and difficult to climb. At the moment Simpson fell, he was already severely injured. The fracture in his right leg had occurred earlier during the descent. Now he was hanging on the rope, unable to place weight on the damaged limb and unable to see the terrain beneath him. Above, Yates attempted to hold his position. The weight of Simpson, combined with the slope and the snow conditions, placed extreme strain on the anchor point and on Yates himself. For a prolonged period he attempted to stabilize the situation, hoping Simpson would regain footing against the ice wall below. However, Simpson had fallen into open space inside the crevasse. There was no visible ledge or slope within reach. The rope kept him suspended but offered no clear path back upward. Communication between the two climbers was almost impossible. Wind moved across the ridge above, and the depth of the crevasse absorbed sound. Each man could only partially understand the other's situation. After a long period of tension on the rope, Yates faced a critical decision. Remaining in place indefinitely was not possible. The weight pulling downward was gradually dragging him toward the edge of the crevasse. Without a stable anchor, both climbers risked being pulled into the opening. Believing that Simpson had fallen beyond recovery and unable to reverse the situation, Yates cut the rope. When the tension disappeared, Simpson fell further into the crevasse. The drop was substantial but not immediately fatal. Instead of falling to the bottom of the glacier, Simpson landed on a sloping ledge of ice depth within the crevasse system. He lost consciousness after the fall. The amount of time that passed before he began the awareness is not precisely known. When Simpson later described the event, he noted that he gradually became aware of his surroundings rather than waking suddenly. The darkness inside the crevasse limited visibility, but a faint vertical shaft above allowed a small amount of light to reach the interior. His situation was severe. His leg remained badly fractured. The rope that had connected him to Yates was now gone. The crevasse walls around him were steep and smooth. The temperature inside the ice chamber remained well below freezing. Simpson carried limited climbing equipment, but little food or water remained accessible after the fall. He was also still positioned on the mountain glacier, far from base camp. For many climbers, such circumstances would leave no clear course of action. However, Simpson began assessing the immediate environment around him. The ledge where he landed sloped downward into a narrow passage of ice. At first it was unclear whether this passage connected to the surface or descended deeper into the glacier. The opening appeared extremely confined, and the floor was uneven. Movement with a broken leg required careful adjustment. Simpson used his ice and remaining strength in his upper body to reposition himself slowly. Every movement risked further injury or another fall deeper into the crevasse system. Climbers who train in alpine environments often rely on structured problem solving when confronted with danger. Rather than attempting rapid escape, Simpson focused on immediate, manageable steps. The first objective was simply to move away from the exposed ledge where he had fallen. Using his arms and left leg, he began lowering himself slowly into the narrow ice tunnel below. The process was slow and physically exhausting. Each shift of weight caused pain in the injured leg, and the cold environment reduced muscle efficiency. The passage descended through irregular ice formations. In some areas the ceiling was low enough that Simpson had to crawl. In others the floor steepened sharply, forcing him to control his movement with his ice pressed against the wall. Light remained extremely limited. Most of the interior was illuminated only by faint blue reflections from the ice surfaces. The descent through the crevasse tunnel took course. At several points the path appeared to narrow completely, raising uncertainty about whether it would continue. However, Simpson continued moving downward gradually, maintaining deliberate movements to avoid slipping. Eventually the tunnel opened into a wider chamber where more light was visible. The source of this light appeared to come from a distant opening further along the glacier. Reaching that opening required continued crawling and sliding across the uneven ice floor. The broken leg forced Simpson to drag the injured limb behind him while using his arms to move forward. The distance through the ice system was later estimated to be significant, though exact measurements remain uncertain. What is clear is that Simpson eventually reached an exit point where the crevasse system opened onto the glacier surface. Emerging from the crevasse brought new challenges. The glacier surrounding Siula Grande consists of broken ice, crevasses, and unstable snow bridges. Movement across it requires careful route selection even for uninjured climbers. Simpson now faced this terrain alone, with a fractured leg, minimal supplies, and no rope. Base camp was located somewhere down the valley, several kilometers away. At that altitude, even healthy climbers move slowly across glacier terrain. For Simpson, the only available method of travel was crawling. He began descending the glacier by dragging himself across the ice, using his ice to stabilize movement and his arms to pull his body forward. The progress was extremely slow. Cold conditions and physical injury limited endurance. Dehydration also became an increasing concern, as snow had to be melted in the mouth for small amounts of water. Despite these conditions, Simpson continued moving in the direction he believed would lead toward the base camp area. Night cycles passed while he moved across the glacier. Without reliable timekeeping, the distinction between day and night became less clear. Movement occurred when light allowed visibility of the terrain ahead. In Ig Mountains, survival often depends on persistence rather than speed. Simpson's strategy remained consistent: move forward gradually, stop when necessary, and continue when possible. The glacier beneath Siula Grande extended over a large basin of broken ice formations. The base camp established by the expedition had been placed on a moraine ridge near the edge of this glacier. Simpson did not know whether the camp was still occupied. Meanwhile, above on the mountain, Yates had descended alone after cutting the rope. Believing Simpson had died in the crevasse, he continued downward and eventually returned to base camp with Richard Hawking. The assumption within the camp was that Simpson had not survived the fall. Days began to pass. Unaware of this assumption, Simpson continued dragging himself across the glacier. Each movement covered only a short distance, but the direction remained consistent, toward the valley below. The slow progress continued across the ice field. After emerging from the crevasse system on the glacier below Siula Grande, Joe Simpson faced a landscape that extended for several kilometers before reaching the lower valley. The terrain consisted of fractured ice, shallow snow cover, and scattered crevasses formed by the slow movement of the glacier. Under normal circumstances, climbers descending from the mountain would move cautiously but steadily across the surface. With a severe fracture in his right leg, Simpson's movement was reduced to dragging his body forward using his arms and left leg. The process required constant effort. His itheaxe provided a point of support that allowed him to pull himself across the uneven surface. Each shift forward covered only a small distance. Temperature at that elevation remained low, especially during the night. Exposure to wind and ice gradually reduced body heat. Simpson's clothing, designed for climbing but not for prolonged immobility, offered only limited insulation against these conditions. Water became an increasing concern. Without equipment to melt snow properly, Simpson relied on placing small amounts of snow in his mouth and allowing it to melt slowly. This method provided minimal hydration but helped prevent complete dehydration. Time became difficult to measure. Movement occurred during periods when daylight allowed him to see crevasses and other hazards ahead. During darker periods he often remained stationary to conserve energy. Meanwhile, at the base camp below the mountain, Simon Yates had completed his descent and rejoined Richard Hawking. Based on the events at the crevasse and the fall that followed the cutting of the rope, Yates believed Simpson had not survived. The camp itself was temporary, consisting of a small number of tents positioned near the edge of the glacier on a rocky moraine. Supplies were limited, and the expedition schedule required eventual departure from the area. Over the following days, Simpson continued moving slowly across the glacier basin. The distance covered each day remained small, but the direction remained consistent toward the lower terrain where the camp had been located. Physical exhaustion increased. The injury to his leg made each movement painful, and the repeated effort of pulling his body forward gradually weakened his upper body strength. Eventually, after several days of crawling across the ice field, Simpson reached the lower edge of the glacier near the moraine ridge where the expedition's base camp had been established. By that time, the camp was nearly abandoned. Inside the tents, Yates and Hawking were preparing to leave the mountain. They believed the expedition had already ended in loss. Outside, somewhere beyond the edge of the camp, a figure was approaching slowly across the rocks. By the time Joe Simpson reached the moraine ridge near the base camp below Siula Grande, several days had passed since his fall into the crevasse. The glacier crossing had taken nearly all of his remaining strength. The base camp, established earlier in the expedition, consisted of a small cluster of tents positioned on rocky ground beside the glacier. From this location the west face of the mountain remained visible, though the summit was often obscured by ice-shifting cloud. Inside the camp, Simon Yates and Richard Hawking had already begun preparing to leave the area. Supplies were running low, and after several days without any sign of Simpson, they had concluded that they had not survived the fall into the crevasse. Packing equipment and organizing loads for the journey out of the valley occupied most of their attention. The assumption that the expedition had ended in loss had already been accepted. During the evening, as darkness approached, Yates reported hearing a faint sound outside the tent. At first the noise was difficult to identify. When moving across the moraine sometimes produced irregular sounds as it shifted loose stones. However, the sound continued. When Yates stepped outside to investigate, he discovered Simpson lying on the ground near the edge of the camp. After days of crawling across the glacier and the moraine rocks, Simpson had finally reached the tents. His physical condition was severe. The broken leg had not been treated since the injury on the mountain. Dehydration and exhaustion were also significant concerns. Despite these conditions, Simpson had remained conscious long enough to reach the camp. Immediate efforts were made to stabilize him. Warm fluids and basic first aid were provided using the limited medical supplies available with the expedition. Movement was kept minimal to avoid worsening the leg injury. The following stage of recovery required leaving the remote valley and reaching medical care. For the moment, however, Simpson had completed the most difficult part of the ordeal. He had returned from the glacier. The survival of Joe Simpson in the mountains surrounding Siula Grande later became one of the most widely discussed events in modern mountaineering. After reaching the base camp, Simpson still faced a long journey out of the remote Cordillera Guayguas. The expedition members organized a gradual evacuation from the valley using improvised support for his injured leg. Medical treatment eventually confirmed the severity of the fracture, but recovery remained possible. Attention later focused not only on Simpson's survival, but also on the decision made by Simon Yates during the incident on the mountain. When Yates cut the rope while Simpson was suspended inside the crevasse, he acted under conditions where both climbers risked being pulled to their deaths. The choice became the subject of significant discussion within the climbing community. Many climbers recognized that such decisions occur in environments where time, visibility, and physical strength are severely limited. The event demonstrated the complex reality of partnership in high-altitude climbing, where survival sometimes depends on judgments made with incomplete information. In later years Simpson documented the experience in the book Touching the Void. The account described the sequence of events in detail and contributed to broader understanding of the psychological and physical challenges faced in extreme environments. The mountains themselves remained unchanged. Siula Grande continues to rise above the glacier basin where the incident occurred. The crevasses that form within its glaciers still open and close as the ice slowly moves through the valley. Climbers continue to travel into the Guayguas Range, drawn by the same isolation and scale that existed in 1985. The story left behind on that glacier is not one of triumph. It is a record of endurance, uncertainty, and the narrow margin that sometimes separates survival from loss.